Why was she still standing, when every step felt like fire burning through her leg? Lieutenant Sarah Martinez limped across the dust-swept compound of Forward Operating Base Delta, the desert sun pressing down like a punishment. Her uniform clung to her skin, her jaw locked tight. No one needed to know. Not yet. Soldiers saluted as she passed, none daring to comment on the stiffness in her stride. The blast had been 3 days ago, but the truth of it still lived inside her body. An IED, sudden, violent, the kind of explosion that turns air into knives. Her Humvee had been hurled sideways, grinding to a stop against a concrete barrier. She remembered the sound of her driver screaming, glass snapping, and then the quiet that followed. Too quiet. She had crawled from the wreckage with blood running hot down her thigh. Even then, she refused the stretcher. A field bandage, a clenched jaw, a promise to keep leading, that was enough. Or so she told herself. But the wound was deeper than anyone knew. Each stride across the compound now carried a hidden war. Beneath her trousers, infection crept like a shadow. Red lines spreading from the wound, fever turning her thoughts heavy. She pushed forward anyway, her spine rigid with pride. A commander doesn't limp. A commander doesn't falter. She thought of her soldiers, boys and girls barely old enough to buy a beer back home. They looked to her not just for orders but for strength. That meant something to her. That meant everything. She had always been different from other officers. Some wore their rank like armor, expecting obedience because the patches said so. Sarah earned it another way. She ate last. She slept less. She carried the extra weight when someone faltered. And she walked point on patrol every time. Her soldiers trusted her because she never asked them to bear something she wasn't willing to shoulder herself. That's why she would not, let them see her weakness now. As she reached the communications tent, the dry wind stung her face, carrying sand that scratched her skin. She kept her chin high, her pace even. No stumble, no pause. Inside, she delivered orders with the calm precision of someone who seemed untouched. Only when the door closed behind her did she let her weight fall against the table, her hands gripping the wood until the fever's wave passed. She hated herself for that flicker of weakness. Her mind drifted not to the convoy, not to the wreckage, but to another battlefield long before this one. East Low's Angels, childhood. Her mother working endless shifts cleaning hospital rooms, her younger brother Marcus clinging to her hand, looking to her as protector. She had learned early that showing weakness invited predators. You kept your chin up, your steps sharp, your eyes steady. It was the only way to survive. The military had given her more than discipline. It had given her purpose, structure, a way out of streets where gunshots were more common than lullabies. Yet it had also taught her something harsher: leadership was sacrifice. The officer eats last. The officer lies awake so the soldiers can sleep. That sacrifice had carried her far, but now it was threatening to undo her. Because her wound was not healing. In the privacy of her quarters that night, Sarah unwrapped the bandage. The sight nearly broke her. Flesh swollen, inflamed, streaks of red crawling outward. She knew enough medicine to recognize the danger, infection pushing toward blood poisoning. She traced the angry lines with her fingertips, her stomach twisting. Fear slid into her chest, not fear of death, not exactly. It was fear of failure. Fear that if she was pulled from command, her soldiers would lose the steady anchor they needed. They trusted her more than anyone else. If she left, who would hold them together? She rewrapped the wound with trembling hands. Tomorrow would bring more drills, more patrols, more eyes watching her. Tomorrow she would need to look strong. But time was not on her side. Word came at dawn. The SEAL medical team scheduled to arrive in 5 days was coming early. 2 days early. An emergency at another base had altered their plans. She felt her stomach drop at the news. 2 fewer days to hide. 2 fewer days to fight the fever in silence. Her most trusted sergeant, Rodriguez, caught the flicker of change on her face. He always did. "Everything all right, Lieutenant?" His tone was casual, but his eyes probed deeper. Sarah forced a smile. Just adjusting timelines, nothing to worry about. She trusted Rodriguez. He had earned that trust 100 times over, but she would not drag him into her deception. If she fell, she would fall alone. The day stretched long. The heat wrapped around her like chains. During a perimeter check, she had to stop more than once to steady herself, her chest heaving as if she had run miles. Private Johnson, barely 19, noticed. "Ma'am," he asked gently, "you sure you're okay? You look pale." His voice carried no suspicion, only concern. That nearly cracked her. She gave him a firm nod and brushed it aside, but inside she wondered. If even the youngest could see through her act, what chance did she have against a SEAL medic trained to spot weakness from a mile away? That night, she did something against every instinct she owned. She opened the base's fragile internet link and pulled the personnel files of the incoming SEAL team. Maybe there would be something she could use, some advantage, some way to mask what was happening to her body. She scrolled until she reached the team leader's file. Chief Petty Officer Michael "Doc" Thompson, 15 years of combat medicine, seasoned by countless deployments. His record read like a blueprint of resilience, nothing unusual for a SEAL medic. But then her eyes froze on the photograph. The face was older, sharper, but the eyes, those eyes she knew. Her breath caught. Could it really be him? Michael Thompson, Roosevelt High, 2 grades ahead. A boy who had once patched up her brother Marcus after a bicycle crash outside the corner store. She remembered it vividly now, the way he had knelt on the dirty sidewalk, using his shirt as a bandage, calming Marcus with a voice that carried more compassion than most grown men. It had been a small thing, just a scraped knee, a shaken boy. But for Sarah, it had been unforgettable. In a neighborhood hardened by violence and neglect, Michael had shown kindness, a rare, steady light. And now, of all the medics in the Navy, it was him who would walk into her camp. The irony struck hard. The very man whose eyes she remembered for their compassion was now the one most likely to uncover her secret. Sleep was impossible. Fever rolled through her in waves. She lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if he would recognize her, wondering if the boy who once stopped for her brother still existed inside the hardened medic he had become. The helicopter came at dawn, blades chopping the air into a storm of dust and grit. Sarah stood at attention with her senior staff, her boots steady though her body swayed inside. Every muscle fought the fever, every nerve screamed to sit down. The SEALs disembarked with practiced precision, and then he stepped off. Taller than memory, his shoulders broader, his stride filled with the confidence of a man who had seen too much and survived anyway. Their eyes met. For the briefest second she saw it, recognition flickering across his face. The introductions went as protocol demanded. She kept her voice level, her tone steady, her mask unbroken. But as she briefed the team, she caught him studying her, his gaze not just professional but searching, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Later in her office, she tried to breathe through the fever, tried to gather strength. A knock came. "Come in," she called, bracing for a report. But it wasn't a soldier, it was him. Chief Petty Officer Michael Thompson closed the door softly behind him. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said formally. Then his voice shifted, softer, almost familiar. "Or should I say Sarah Martinez from Roosevelt High?" The air seemed to leave the room. Her defenses crumbled. "Yeah," she whispered, unable to keep the mask in place. "You remember." He gave a faint smile. "Hard to forget the girl whose little brother I patched up on a sidewalk. Marcus, wasn't it? How's he doing?" Her lips curved despite herself. "He's a doctor now, pediatric surgery, says you inspired him." Michael's expression softened. Then his eyes sharpened again, scanning her posture, the tension in her frame. "And what about you, Sarah? Because from where I'm standing, you're running a fever and favoring your left leg. How long were you planning on hiding that?" Her mouth opened, denial ready, words rehearsed, but she couldn't speak them. The truth weighed too heavy. For the first time since the blast, She felt the walls of silence tremble. What do you say when someone sees through the walls you've built? Sarah sat frozen at her desk, the desert heat pressing in, her fever pounding like a second heartbeat. Michael Thompson stood across from her, steady, patient, those familiar eyes holding hers. She could almost hear the echo of years, the boy with a calm voice on a cracked sidewalk, now standing in front of her as a man who had made survival his profession. She tried to reach for protocol, to armor herself in military formality. "I'm fine, Chief, just tired from extended ops." The words came flat, hollow. But Michael didn't flinch. His voice lowered, quiet but unwavering. "Sarah, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know infection when I see it, and you've got it written all over you. Tell me, when was the last time that leg was properly examined?" Her body betrayed her. Her hand gripped the edge of the desk to stay upright, her vision tilting with fever. Still, she clung to denial. "It's nothing I can't handle." Michael pulled a chair closer, sitting down opposite her, leaning forward just enough to close the space between them. His tone softened, but his eyes remained sharp. "Let me tell you what I see. I see an officer who's been carrying everyone else's weight while hiding a wound that could kill her. I see the same girl who carried her little brother home from school every day, who worked weekends to help her mother pay bills. Always putting others first. Always pretending you're fine." The words pierced deeper than the fever. Her jaw tightened. "You barely knew me in high school." "Maybe not up close," Michael admitted. "But everyone knew of you, top of your class, always watching over Marcus, always standing straighter than the rest, like you were already carrying something heavier than we could see." For a moment, Sarah's world wavered, not from fever but from memory. She remembered nights at the kitchen table with textbooks spread wide, Marcus asleep beside her, her mother stumbling in from another late shift. She remembered telling herself over and over, "Don't break. Don't show it. Someone has to stay strong." Her lips parted, but the sound came weak. "I had responsibilities." Michael didn't argue, he only nodded. "You still do, but your first responsibility is to your soldiers, and they don't need a commander who collapses from sepsis. They need you alive." The word sepsis landed like a blow. She knew it. She'd feared it. Hearing it aloud made it real. Her mask cracked. "5 days," she whispered. "IED blast, convoy run." Michael's face hardened. 5 days, and you've been self-treating. Sarah, if that infection spreads to your blood, there won't be anything anyone can do. You'll be gone in hours." She swallowed hard, throat burning. "I can't leave my soldiers. They depend on me." "They depend on you being alive." His tone was firm, no softness now. He rose from the chair, moving toward the door. "I'm going to get my kit. We're treating this now, and then we're arranging an evacuation." Her chest tightened, panic surged. "Wait." He stopped, hand resting on the door handle, looking back. "If you evacuate me, it goes on my record. It'll follow me. My career, my command, it could end everything I've worked for." For a long moment he studied her. The wind rattled the thin glass window. Then he spoke quietly, with the weight of truth. "Sarah, sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the smartest tactical decision you can make." And then he was gone. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she sat there, trembling. The words hung in the room, tactical decision. She had built her life on tactics, on discipline. Why then did surrender feel like failure? Minutes later, he returned carrying a black case, the kind of kit that looked like it could hold life itself. His expression was all business now, precise, professional. "I need you on the cot," he said, nodding toward the narrow military-issue bed in the corner. "And I need you to trust me completely." Every instinct told her to resist. Every ounce of pride screamed to stand tall. But her body betrayed her again, the fever too heavy, her legs too weak. Slowly, she limped to the cot, each step sending jagged pain through her thigh. She eased onto the mattress, staring at the ceiling, jaw clenched. Michael laid out instruments with careful, practiced motions. Bandage scissors, saline, Gauze, antiseptics. His movements were deliberate, precise, the same way he might prepare a weapon before combat. "This might hurt," he said, voice calm but clipped. He cut away her bandages, revealing the wound she had kept hidden from everyone. His expression shifted, grave, controlled, but undeniably worried. "Sarah," he said softly, "this isn't just infected. It's advancing. Jagged edges from shrapnel, tissue angry and inflamed, red streaks running the length of your thigh. We're looking at cellulitis, maybe even sepsis." Her chest tightened. The room seemed to narrow. She turned her face toward the wall, ashamed. "I couldn't leave," she murmured. "Not yet." He began cleaning the wound with steady hands. Despite the urgency, his touch was gentle. The sting made her flinch, but his voice anchored her. "Breathe, just breathe through it." He worked methodically, irrigating, disinfecting, replacing old bandages with fresh dressings. And all the while he spoke casual, almost conversational. "Tell me about your training. Where'd you learn field medicine?" Her brow furrowed. "I didn't just basic first aid, trauma modules at OCS, nothing advanced." Michael paused, studying her. "That's interesting, because someone been taking excellent care of this wound. Cleaning techniques, dressing, even your antibiotic use. This isn't basic, this is advanced." Confusion flickered across her fevered mind. "I just did what seemed right." His eyes narrowed. "Sarah, you've been using honey as an antiseptic. That's not standard military protocol. Where'd you learn that?" She blinked, startled. She hadn't even thought about it. It had just felt natural, a choice made without thinking. "I don't know, I just knew." Michael's gaze deepened. "And the pressure points. You've been using acupressure for pain management, haven't you? I can see it in your skin, small bruises where you've pressed." Her lips parted. She had. Instinctively, she'd pressed certain points when the pain grew unbearable, but she'd never been taught that, not in training, not anywhere. Michael leaned back slightly, studying her with something like awe. "I think you've been carrying more medical knowledge than you realize. Unconscious skills. Things you absorbed without knowing." The word stirred something buried. She closed her eyes, letting memory rise. Long summers at County General, waiting for her mother to finish janitorial shifts. A kind doctor, Ramirez, who let kids roll bandages, stack supplies, sometimes even help calm frightened patients. He had explained things in simple terms, pointing at charts, showing them how to take blood pressure, how to recognize symptoms. Her voice was faint. "There was a doctor, Ramirez, he let us help sometimes, showed us things." Michael nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place. Dr. Ramirez was one of the best emergency physicians in Los Angeles. If he was teaching you, even informally, that explains a lot. Children absorb more than they realize. That knowledge stays, even if you don't remember learning it. His eyes softened, but his words carried weight. "Sarah, your instincts probably kept you alive, but they also let you hide this longer than you should have. You've been fighting a battle your body can't win alone." She lay there in silence, the fever easing slightly as the sting of antiseptic gave way to cooling relief. A strange mixture of shame and revelation swirled inside her. Could she really have carried skills she never knew? Could her childhood have quietly armed her with knowledge that now kept her alive? Michael finished dressing the wound, securing it with fresh bandages. "The good news is you're strong and your instincts bought you time. The bad news is you still need more than field medicine. We're starting antibiotics now, but you need evacuation." Her lips trembled. The word evacuation still felt like defeat, but she was too weak to argue, too tired. That night the fever began to break. She lay on the cot, watching the desert sky shift through the window, orange, then red, then violet. Michael sat nearby, clipboard in hand, monitoring her vitals with quiet focus. His presence filled the silence, steady, grounding. "You weren't alone, you know," he said softly, glancing at her. "You thought you were hiding this, but your soldiers saw more than you realize." Her brow furrowed. but before she could answer, there was a knock at the door. Sergeant Rodriguez entered, carrying a tray of steaming rations. His eyes flicked to the medical kit, then to Sarah on the cot. Concern etched deep into his face. "Ma'am, everything all right?" Sarah's throat tightened. She glanced at Michael. He gave the slightest nod. Her voice wavered. "Rodriguez, I've been hiding an injury. Chief Thompson caught it. He's been treating me." For a heartbeat, silence. Then Rodriguez's face shifted, surprise, worry, and finally, something that looked like relief. "With respect, ma'am," he said quietly, "we knew." Sarah blinked. "You what?" Rodriguez gave a faint, almost guilty smile. "You think soldiers can't see when their commander's hurting? We noticed. We just didn't know how to help without stepping on your command. So we covered where we could, waited for you to trust us." Her chest ached, her throat burned, tears pressed hot behind her eyes. She had spent days breaking herself to protect them, and all along they had been silently protecting her. For the first time in years, she let the tears fall. How do you keep command when your soldiers know you've been hiding the truth? Sarah wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, embarrassed, but there was no hiding them now. Rodriguez stood near the door, holding the tray of food as if it weighed more than his rifle. His eyes softened, and for once, the steel of discipline in his voice gave way to something gentler. "Ma'am, we weren't blind. We saw you slowing down, saw you biting back the pain. We just figured if you hadn't said anything, it meant you had a plan." Sarah's breath caught. Her voice cracked as she asked, "All of you?" Rodriguez gave a small, tired smile. "The whole squad, ma'am, even Johnson. He started a pool betting how long it would take before you admitted you were hurt. I had 5 days. Looks like I lost." Despite herself, Sarah laughed. It burst out raw, jagged, almost painful. Laughter in the middle of fever, in the middle of fear. She covered her face with both hands, shaking her head. "You were betting on my stubbornness." "Not stubbornness," Rodriguez corrected softly. "Dedication, there's a difference." Behind him, Michael watched in silence, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but his eyes carrying something that looked like respect. Sarah drew a ragged breath, her voice dropping. "I thought I was protecting you." Rodriguez set the tray down carefully, his gaze steady on hers. "You did, just not the way you think. You showed us what it means to keep moving, even when it hurts. But we're not here to watch you fall apart, ma'am. We're here to have your back. You taught us that." The words landed heavier than any reprimand, heavier than any medal. She realized in that moment that leadership wasn't about being untouchable. It was about trust, and maybe she hadn't been trusting them enough. Michael stepped forward, his tone shifting back to business. "Sergeant, your lieutenant is stable for now, but she'll need evacuation. How's the unit going to handle her absence?" Rodriguez straightened, his soldier's voice back. "We'll manage, Chief. She trained us well. But," he glanced at Sarah, "we'll be waiting for her return." That last word lingered like a promise. Return. Sarah closed her eyes, her chest aching in ways that had nothing to do with the infection. She hadn't thought beyond survival, hadn't imagined what came after. Could she even come back? Would the army let her? But the warmth in Rodriguez's tone, like a soldier promising his commander that her place would still be there, lifted something inside her. Michael gave a single nod, then returned to his notes. "We'll stabilize her tonight. Tomorrow, we arrange the bird." The word bird, evacuation helicopter, lodged in her gut like a stone. That night her soldiers trickled in one by one. Each found some excuse, delivering reports, checking supplies, dropping off food. But every visit carried the same undercurrent: relief, concern, silent loyalty. Private Johnson shuffled in last, his face still boyish despite the desert grit. He stood awkwardly at the door, shifting from foot to foot. "Ma'am," he muttered, "just glad you're getting looked after. We were worried." She studied him, remembering his question days before, the way he'd noticed the pallor in her face. She had brushed him off then. Now she gave him a faint smile. "Thank you, Johnson, for noticing." He flushed, nodded, and slipped out. When the door finally closed behind the last soldier, Sarah lay back against her pillow, overwhelmed. All this time she had thought she was fooling them, but they had seen her. They had covered for her. They had quietly carried her while she pretended to carry them. Michael sat in the corner, silent but watchful, his presence steady as a metronome. "They're good soldiers," he said finally. Sarah turned her head toward him, eyes glistening. "They're good people." He leaned forward slightly. "And you're learning something important. Leadership isn't about hiding your scars, it's about trust. You gave them yours and they gave theirs back. That's why they're loyal. Not because you're invincible, but because you're human." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but the truth pressed too hard. She let her eyes close, exhaustion pulling her under. When dawn came, she woke to the sound of rotors in the distance. Not the constant patrols, they had a different rhythm. This was heavier, more final. She sat up slowly, every muscle aching as Michael prepared his kit again. "It's time," he said gently. Her chest tightened. "Evacuation." He nodded. "Birds inbound this afternoon." She swallowed hard, fear surging, not of death, not of pain, but of absence, leaving her unit, leaving them vulnerable. "What happens to them?" she whispered. "They keep going," Michael said simply, "because you taught them how." She turned her face away, blinking against sudden tears. Hours stretched long, each minute heavier than the last. Her soldiers moved through the compound with the quiet efficiency of men and women pretending nothing was wrong. But every glance, every nod, carried the unspoken truth. They knew. They were already preparing to hold the line without her. By noon, Rodriguez entered again, his voice even. "Birds 30 minutes out, ma'am." Sarah stood shakily, refusing to be carried, refusing to be seen as broken. She dressed carefully, pulling her uniform straight, every movement deliberate despite the pain. If she was leaving, she would leave standing tall. When the helicopter roared into the sky, dust whipping around the landing pad, her soldiers gathered. A silent formation, not ordered but chosen. They stood at attention as she approached, their faces grim but proud. Her chest constricted. She raised her hand in salute and the entire unit snapped to, their voices uniting in a thunderous, "Yes, ma'am." The sound carried through the desert like a vow. As Michael helped her into the helicopter, Sarah's eyes swept over them one last time. She had feared leaving them. But in that moment, she realized they weren't broken by her departure. They were stronger because of what they had shared. As the bird lifted, sand swirling like a storm below, Sarah's throat tightened with words she couldn't speak. She pressed her hand against the glass, a silent farewell. Her soldiers stood unwavering, their silhouettes blurring into the dust. Inside the helicopter, the vibration rattled through her bones. Michael sat beside her, head set over his ears, steady as ever. He glanced at her, voice calm but pointed. "You did the right thing." Sarah stared out the window, watching the desert fall away. Her voice cracked low, almost to herself. "Then why does it feel like I failed them?" Michael leaned closer, his words firm. "Because you've carried responsibility for so long, you don't know what it feels like to let someone else carry you. But trust me, Sarah, they're not weaker without you. They're stronger because of you." She closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears. For the first time in years, she wasn't leading, wasn't commanding, wasn't deciding. She was simply being carried. And it terrified her. The helicopter thundered toward the horizon, leaving the desert and her soldiers behind. But somewhere beneath the fever, beneath the pain, a seed of realization stirred. Maybe this wasn't the end of her command. Maybe it was the beginning of something else. What happens when the silence you've hidden behind is finally stripped away? The helicopter roared through the sky, its frame vibrating under the weight of desert winds. Sarah sat strapped in, her head resting against the rattling bulkhead, eyes fixed on the horizon. Below, the desert stretched endless and merciless, a battlefield of dust and memory. She had always been the one carrying others. Now she was strapped down, being carried herself, and the helplessness gnawed at her. Michael sat across from her, headset clamped over his ears, his gaze steady. Every few minutes he checked her pulse, adjusted her IV, scribbled notes onto his pad. His hands were methodical, precise, but his eyes, those betrayed something else. Recognition, concern, maybe even something softer, though Sarah dared not name it. She closed her eyes, retreating inward. The fever had broken hours earlier under the antibiotics he'd administered, but weakness lingered, seeping into her bones. Her mind drifted back to the convoy blast, the thunder of the explosion, the sickening twist of metal, the taste of blood. She remembered crawling out of the wreckage, refusing the stretcher, refusing to look vulnerable in front of her soldiers. She had told herself it was strength. But now, strapped to this cot, she wondered if it had only been fear, fear of being seen as breakable. The helicopter touched down at a forward medical station. Dust and sand billowed up around them. Medics rushed forward, stretcher in hand, but Sarah waved them off, her pride refusing one last indignity. Michael gave her a look, half exasperation, half admiration, and let her walk, her limp hidden behind clenched teeth. Inside the sterile white walls of the field hospital, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled of antiseptic, cold and clinical, nothing like the dusty heat of Delta. Sarah lay on a clean bed, her uniform replaced with a gown, her weapons stored away. Stripped of everything that had defined her outside these walls. Just a patient now, just another body on a cot. Doctors hovered, running tests, checking vitals, murmuring words she didn't want to hear. Blood cultures, risk of sepsis, weeks of antibiotics, possibility of long-term damage. She stared at the ceiling, her mind numb. When the doctors left, Michael remained. He pulled a chair to her bedside, his tone softer now. "You fought hard, Sarah, but even the strongest soldier needs reinforcements. You understand that in the field. Why can't you understand it for yourself?" Her throat tightened. "Because if I let them see me fall, I lose more than blood. I lose authority." "You think authority comes from never falling?" He leaned closer, his voice steady, deliberate. "Authority comes from getting back up. Your soldiers knew you were hurt, and they stood by you anyway, not because you were perfect, but because you were theirs." The words pierced deeper than the IV needle in her arm. She turned her face away, unable to meet his eyes. For days, she drifted between treatments and restless dreams. Fever hallucinations blurred with memories. Her mother's tired hands, Marcus's small voice calling her name, nights spent at County General watching Dr. Ramirez roll bandages and explain how the human heart worked. She remembered pressing her fingers to her brother's wrist, counting the beats, fascinated and frightened all at once. Those memories surged back now with clarity she had never expected. And with them came a question. Had she been carrying hidden knowledge all along? Had her instincts in the desert come from a childhood she had long buried? On the fourth day, Michael pulled up her lab results. "The antibiotics are working. You'll recover, but you need to prepare for the investigation." Her stomach dropped. Investigation. Any unreported injury that results in evacuation triggers automatic review. They'll ask why you didn't report sooner, why you risked concealment. She stared at him, the fluorescent light buzzing above like judgment. "If they decide I was reckless." "They won't." His voice cut through, firm. "Your soldiers will testify. They'll say the wound didn't look serious until I examined it. They'll protect you, Sarah, the same way you tried to protect them." Her chest ached. She thought of Rodriguez's quiet loyalty, Johnson's awkward concern, the way the entire squad had stood in formation as the helicopter lifted. They had already been protecting her. While she thought she was shielding them, they had been watching her back. That night, Rodriguez called in via satellite link. His voice crackled through the speaker, but his steadiness carried clear. "Ma'am, the squad's holding the line. Don't you worry. We'll cover the ground until you're back." Raj, she whispered, her throat tight, I may not come back. The silence stretched heavy until his answer came, calm and certain. Yes, you will, because you're our lieutenant. Doesn't matter what the papers say. Doesn't matter what the brass decides. You're ours. Her eyes burned. She pressed her fist to her mouth, stifling a sob. Michael watched from the corner, his gaze soft but intent. When the call ended, he spoke quietly. Do you see now? You thought you had to hold everything alone. But the truth is, you built a unit that knows how to hold you too. The words lodged deep. She didn't answer, but something inside her shifted. Weeks passed. Physical therapy began, each step a reminder of both pain and progress. She gritted her teeth through exercises, sweat dripping, scar tissue screaming. She wanted to rush, to return, to reclaim what she had lost, but recovery demanded patience, something she had never learned well. Michael visited often, sometimes with charts, sometimes with silence. He asked her about her childhood, about Dr. Ramirez, about the way she had instinctively treated herself. Slowly, the pieces began to fit. Her skills hadn't come from nowhere. They were the echoes of a different path, one she had never taken. One afternoon, Michael returned from a call with a file in hand. He sat on the edge of her bed, his expression unreadable. I spoke to Dr. Ramirez. Her head lifted, startled. He remembers you, Michael said. Remembers you and Marcus waiting at the hospital. Remembers how quickly you picked up medical skills. He recommended you for a scholarship once. Full ride to UCLA's pre-med program. Sarah's breath caught. What? It never reached you, Michael continued. The counselor never passed it along. Ramirez always wondered what happened to the girl who could diagnose patients better than some residents. Sarah stared at him, her chest heaving. A different life opened before her eyes, classrooms instead of convoys, stethoscopes instead of rifles. Could she have been a doctor? Could she have saved lives another way? Her voice cracked. My whole life could have been different. Michael leaned closer, his voice steady, anchoring. Maybe, but think about this. If you'd gone that path, you wouldn't have been in that convoy. You wouldn't have been there for your soldiers. The lives you've touched, the loyalty you've built, that came because of the path you took. Different, yes, but not wasted. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. He was right. She couldn't deny it. The realization washed over her. She had been meant to serve one way or another. Medicine, command, teaching, it was all the same heartbeat, to carry others, to protect, to save. As the weeks turned to months, her strength returned. The scar faded to a thin line, but the lessons etched themselves deeper. She was no longer the officer who thought she had to be silent. She was something more now. And for the first time, she wondered if her true calling had yet to be discovered. What do you do when the path back to who you were is no longer there? 3 months later, the desert was far behind her. Sarah stood in the mirror-lined walls of a rehabilitation center's physical therapy room. Sweat glistened on her brow, her hands gripping resistance bands as her scarred leg trembled against the strain. Every rep carried echoes of fire, but she pushed through, her reflection staring back at her like a challenge. The scar was now only a thin white line running across her thigh. Faint, almost invisible, but she knew. She felt it every time she flexed, every time the muscles pulled tight, a reminder of shrapnel, silence, and survival. Dr. Patricia Williams, the chief physician overseeing her therapy, entered with a clipboard in hand. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," she said, smiling warmly. "You're cleared for full duty. Your leg is stronger now than before." Sarah exhaled, relief rushing through her body. "Thank you, doctor. I'm ready to get back to Delta. My soldiers need me." Williams hesitated, the smile lingering but her eyes carrying something else. "About that, you're not going back to Forward Operating Base Delta." The words hit harder than the blast that had torn her convoy apart. "What do you mean?" "You're being reassigned," Williams said gently. "A new program, one that will make better use of your skills." Her chest tightened. Reassigned away from my unit. The doctor handed her the folder. Inside were orders stamped and signed, training program development, leadership integration with advanced field medical training, multiple bases, multiple units. Sarah's stomach twisted. She was being pulled from her soldiers, the very people she had bled for. I can't just leave them, she whispered. Williams's voice softened. It's not a punishment, quite the opposite. This program was designed around you. Your instincts in field medicine, the way you led while wounded. The Army believes others can learn from your experience. Her hand tightened around the folder. I'm a line officer, I'm not a teacher. Maybe not before, Williams said, but you are now. Sarah turned away, swallowing hard, anger and grief knotting in her chest. To lead was one thing. To teach was another. Teaching meant distance. It meant watching others fight battles you no longer could. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her temporary office, she flipped through the training materials. Charts, case studies, lesson outlines. Her own story was listed under example scenario. A line in black ink. The Martinez case, concealment of injury, delayed treatment, leadership implications. Her life had become a study. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Enter, she said sharply. Dr. Williams stepped in again, her expression lighter this time. One more thing, Lieutenant. Your first class of students has been selected. They arrive next week. Sarah barely looked up. Who? Williams smiled. Sergeant Rodriguez and his squad leaders. Seems they requested transfer to your new program. Something about wanting to keep learning from the best officer they've ever served under. The words cut through her anger like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her soldiers hadn't been abandoned. They had followed her. Not out of obligation, not out of orders, but by choice. Tears welled hot in her eyes. She pressed her hand against her mouth, overwhelmed. Even months later, they were still watching her back. That night she sat with the folder open in front of her, the names of her soldiers written in neat type. Her unit, her family. Maybe the battlefield wasn't the only place she could lead them. Maybe leadership wasn't just about standing at the front of the patrol line. Maybe it was about preparing them for every battlefield, even the ones they couldn't yet see. The following week, she entered the classroom prepared for her first session. The room smelled faintly of chalk and coffee, the walls lined with maps and medical charts. At the front, she paused, her hands braced on the desk, her chest tight with nerves she hadn't felt since her first day in uniform. The door opened. Rodriguez walked in first, his face steady, his salute sharp. Behind him, familiar faces filled the seats, men and women who had once watched her limp across the compound in silence, who had shielded her without words. They sat straighter when they saw her. No resentment, no doubt, only pride. Sarah cleared her throat. I'm not going to lie. This is strange for me. I'd rather be in the dust with you than behind a desk. But the Army thinks I've got something worth teaching. I think they're half wrong. I don't have lessons, I have scars, and I'm going to share them with you. Rodriguez gave the faintest smile, nodding once as if to say, that's enough. Over the next hours, she spoke about leadership under strain, about silent burdens, about the cost of hiding weakness. She walked them through advanced field medicine, not textbook lessons, but instinctive ones. The moments when supplies run dry, when time runs shorter, when survival depends not on manuals but on memory and will. She demonstrated how she had cleaned and dressed her own wound in the desert, how she had used honey as antiseptic when supplies ran low, how she had pressed pressure points to hold back waves of pain. She showed them not as a medic, but as a soldier desperate to keep moving. The room was silent, every eye on her, every note taken with care. For the first time, she felt the shift. Teaching wasn't distance. It was another form of command. It wasn't stepping away from battle. It was sending others into battle stronger than they would have been without you. When the class ended, Rodriguez lingered. He approached her desk, his voice quiet. You know, ma'am, you're still leading, just from a different front. Her throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. Later that evening, as she packed her notes, her assistant entered. "You have a visitor, Lieutenant." Sarah looked up. Michael Thompson stepped inside, this time in dress uniform, polished and formal, his presence commanding the room. "Congratulations," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I hear your program off to a strong start." She shook her head with a faint smile. "Thanks to your recommendation. Apparently, my case study is being used across bases." Michael leaned back, his eyes softening. "It already has. 3 officers have reported injuries instead of hiding them. All cited you as their example. You've saved lives without even knowing it." The words sank deep. She had thought her silence would mark her as weak, her injury as failure. But here it was, her story had become strength for others. For a long moment, they sat in quiet. 2 people bound by an old memory of a scraped knee on a Lowe's Angel sidewalk, and a new memory of a battlefield wound. Finally, Michael spoke again. "I have something else to tell you. After I filed my report, I reached out to Dr. Ramirez. He remembered you, and he told me something you never knew. He recommended you for a scholarship when you were 17. Full ride to UCLA's pre-med program." Sarah's breath stopped. "What?" Michael nodded. "The paperwork never reached you. The counselor failed to deliver it. Ramirez said you had more natural aptitude than some medical students. He always wondered why you didn't become a doctor." Her chest tightened as if the air had been sucked from the room. She saw it, an entire life unlived. White coats instead of fatigues, hospitals instead of fobs, healing without hiding. Her voice broke into a whisper. "My whole life could have been different." Michael leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Maybe, but listen, if you had gone that route, you never would have been in that convoy. You never would have been there for your soldiers. The men and women who stood for you wouldn't exist as they do now. You've saved lives in a different way. One path didn't erase the other. It just changed it." Her eyes blurred. She pressed her hand over them, shaking her head slowly. "Why does it feel like I missed something?" "Because you did," Michael said softly. "But you also gained something else. People like you, Sarah, no matter where you stand, you find a way to serve." The words lingered in the air long after he left. That night, Sarah sat alone in her office, the file of her reassignment glowing faintly under the lamp. She thought of Dr. Ramirez, of a path never taken. She thought of Delta, of her soldiers standing in formation as the helicopter lifted. And she thought of the classroom waiting tomorrow. For the first time, she didn't feel torn between who she might have been and who she was. She realized both could live in her. Soldier and healer, leader and teacher, scarred but not broken. And maybe that was enough. What happens when the lesson you're teaching is the one you still haven't mastered yourself? The classroom was quiet, the air thick with the scent of coffee gone cold and paper rubbed thin from note-taking. Sarah paced slowly at the front, her limp barely noticeable now, her movements measured, deliberate. On the board behind her were 3 words written in sharp chalk: silence, sacrifice, trust. Her soldiers, her students now, watched her with the same focus they once carried into patrol briefings. Rodriguez sat in the front row, his hands folded neatly, his eyes unwavering. The others followed his lead, scribbling notes, nodding at her words. Sarah tapped the chalk against the board. "Silence," she said, her voice calm but steady. "The enemy of survival. I thought I could protect you all by keeping mine. I was wrong. Silence doesn't shield anyone. It only delays the inevitable." She let the word hang in the air. A few soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but no one looked away. "Sacrifice," she continued. "It's the currency of leadership. Every officer spends it, but you can't spend what you don't have. My leg was failing and I thought sacrificing myself silently was noble. It was. It was dangerous, to me, to you." Her throat tightened. She turned slightly, drawing in a breath before writing the last word again in bold strokes: trust. "That's the part I forgot," she said softly. I trusted myself to carry your burdens, but I didn't trust you enough to share mine. You carried me anyway, quietly, without asking. That's what loyalty looks like, and it took me nearly dying to see it." For a moment, no one moved. The room was so quiet she could hear the scratch of chalk against the board as she set it down. Then Rodriguez spoke, his voice even but warm. "Ma'am, we already knew. That's why we followed you then. That's why we're here now." Her chest ached. She nodded once, unable to speak. The lesson moved forward, but the words weighed heavy in her mind. Silence, sacrifice, trust. She had written them for her students, but they were still her battle too. Later that afternoon, as the group broke into smaller exercises, Sarah circled the room, observing. They practiced emergency bandaging, pressure point pain management, makeshift antiseptic solutions. She corrected posture, demonstrated techniques, repeated the same motions she had once done alone in the darkness of her quarters at Delta. At the back of the room, a young soldier, Private Harris, quiet, pale, fresh out of basic, struggled with his bandaging. His hands shook, the gauze twisting clumsily. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice low. "Easy. It's not about speed. It's about precision. Take a breath." But Harris's hands shook harder. His jaw clenched, sweat beading at his temple. Finally, the gauze dropped from his fingers. He pushed back his chair abruptly, his breath ragged. The room froze. Sarah stood slowly, her gaze steady. "Private." He shook his head, his voice breaking. I can't do this." Whispers stirred, uneasy. Sarah held up a hand, silencing the room. She stepped closer, her voice calm, even. "Talk to me, Harris. What's going on?" His shoulders shook. "It's not the training, ma'am. His voice cracked. "It's the dreams. I keep seeing him, my buddy, last deployment. He bled out before I could stop it. I froze. His face collapsed, shame tearing through him. And now, every time I try my hands." The silence was suffocating. Every soldier stared at him, stunned. Harris stood trembling, his confession hanging raw in the open. Sarah's heart clenched. She knew that shame. She knew the suffocating grip of silence, the way it strangled from the inside. She took a slow step closer. "Private Harris," she said softly, "look at me." His eyes lifted, watery, desperate. "You think freezing makes you weak?" she asked. He swallowed hard, nodding once. She shook her head firmly. "No, it makes you human. We all freeze, every single one of us. The question isn't whether you froze once. The question is, what do you do now?" His breathing stuttered, uneven. Sarah lowered her voice, steady, deliberate. "You're standing here. You admitted what happened. That's not weakness, Harris. That's strength most soldiers never reach. Because silence kills more of us than bullets do." The room shifted. Soldiers exchanged glances, some nodding, some swallowing hard. Her words weren't just for Harris, they were for all of them. She placed the gauze back in his trembling hands. "Try again. Not because you're perfect. Not because you never froze, but because you're still here. And that means you get another chance." Harris's hand still shook, but this time he wrapped the bandage. Sloppy, uneven, but completed. When he finished, Sarah gave a single nod. "Good, not perfect, but alive, that's what matters." The room was silent, heavy with respect. For Harris, for her, for the lesson none of them would forget. After class, Rodriguez approached, his expression thoughtful. "You handled that well, ma'am." Sarah exhaled slowly. "No, I just told him what I wish someone had told me years ago." Rodriguez tilted his head. "Maybe that's what makes you the right one to teach this, because you've lived it." That night Sarah sat in her quarters, the lamp dim, the silence pressing close. She thought of Harris's shaking hands, his broken confession. She thought of her own silence at Delta, the infection creeping while she told no one. The parallels were too sharp. His shame was hers. His silence was hers, and in helping him she had helped herself. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Marcus, heard about your reassignment. Proud of you, sis. Teaching saves lives too." She smiled faintly, her chest tightening with warmth. Her brother had followed medicine, she had followed the army. Different paths, same destination. Both of them carrying others. Both of them saving in their own way. Later that week, Michael visited again, carrying reports. But his eyes studied her carefully, as if weighing something unspoken. "You handled Harris well," he said. Sarah shrugged lightly. "I just told him the truth." Michael leaned against the desk, his gaze steady. "The truth you've only recently admitted to yourself. That's why it mattered." She looked away, her throat tightening. "You ever think," he continued softly, "that maybe your greatest strength isn't how much you endure, but how much you can give others when you finally stop pretending?" The words sank deep. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. For the first time, she began to see her silence not just as survival, but as something she could finally break. And in breaking it, she was teaching others how to live. What happens when the classroom walls can no longer protect you? The call came just after dawn. Sarah had been reviewing lesson plans in her office, coffee cooling untouched beside her, when the alarm sounded. A convoy returning from training exercises had been ambushed on the road outside the base. Casualties, unknown numbers. The words crackled through the radio like shards of glass. Her heart lurched. Training had always been theory, controlled, safe. But now reality had punched through the walls. Soldiers were bleeding. Soldiers were waiting. Minutes later, she was in the field truck, Rodriguez at her side, their faces set like stone. The other instructors rattled in the back, tense but silent. Sarah's scar throbbed with every jolt of the road, a phantom reminder of her own blast. She ignored it, eyes locked ahead. The scene was chaos. Smoke coiled from a smoldering vehicle. Soldiers crouched behind cover, weapons raised, scanning for threats. Medics scrambled across the dirt, their voices urgent, their hands slick with blood. Sarah stepped out, boots hitting the earth. The air smelled of burning rubber, hot metal, copper. Her eyes swept the scene, cataloging. One soldier clutching his arm, blood seeping through makeshift bandages. Another sprawled in the dirt, pale, unmoving. A third, gasping, a crimson stain spreading across his torso. Her soldiers, her students, froze when they saw her. They weren't looking at their instructor. They were looking at their lieutenant. Sarah's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to step forward to take command. But for a split second, fear clawed at her. This wasn't a drill. Mistakes here didn't mean lost points. They meant lost lives. She forced the fear down. "Rodriguez," she snapped. "Secure the perimeter. Johnson, triage, Harris." She locked eyes with the private who had once frozen in training. "You're with me." Harris's eyes widened, but he nodded, moving forward. They dropped to the soldier with the chest wound. Blood pulsed through his fingers, each breath ragged. Sarah's own breath caught. The memory of her own wound, of hiding, of silence, threatened to drag her under. But this wasn't her, this was him, and he didn't have time for her ghosts. She pressed her hands to the wound, her voice steady. "Harris, Gauze, now." His hands trembled, but he moved. Sarah guided him, her words clipped, calm. "Pressure here, not too much, let him breathe. Good, now seal it, keep your focus. He's counting on you." Harris obeyed, sweat dripping down his brow. His hands shook, but the bandage held. The soldier's breathing steadied, shallow but rhythmic. "Good," Sarah murmured. "That's how you fight the freeze, one breath at a time." They moved to the next casualty. The one sprawled in the dirt, pale and still. Sarah's heart clenched. She checked his neck. A faint pulse, weak but there. "Airways blocked," she muttered. She tilted his head, swept his mouth, cleared debris. His chest rose, then fell. Michael's voice rang out behind her. He had arrived with the SEAL team, already kneeling at another casualty. He glanced up, his eyes catching hers. Approval flickered across his face. The fight blurred. Minutes stretched like hours. Bandages wrapped, tourniquets tightened, IVs secured. Sweat soaked through uniforms, dirt caked on hands and knees. But one by one, the wounded stabilized. When the dust settled, 3 soldiers were on stretchers, alive but battered. Another sat against a wheel well, his arm in a sling, his face pale but determined. Sarah sat back on her heels, chest heaving, her scar aching like fire. Harris slumped beside her, his hands streaked red, his eyes wide with shock. "You did it," she said quietly. He shook his head, voice breaking. "I froze at first." "But you moved after," she cut him off. "That's what matters. You didn't stay frozen, you fought it. You saved him." His throat bobbed. Tears streaked his dust-covered face. Michael approached, kneeling beside them. His eyes moved between Harris and Sarah, his voice calm but firm. "You see what just happened? This is why you teach, Sarah. Because your scars prepared them for this moment. Because your silence, once broken, gave them strength." Sarah looked at Harris, then at the wounded soldiers being loaded into the medevac. A wave of realization washed through her. Her classroom wasn't a place to retreat from battle. It was a place to prepare for it. And today, it had saved lives. When they returned to base, exhaustion pressed heavy. Soldiers dispersed, medics carried reports, the smell of blood lingered. Sarah walked the halls alone, her limp sharper now, her body reminding her of old wounds. She found Rodriguez waiting outside her office. His expression was serious, but his eyes carried pride. "We followed your lead out there, ma'am. You didn't just teach, you commanded." Her throat tightened. "I wasn't supposed to." "Maybe not," he said softly, "but it seems command follows you anyway." That night Sarah sat at her desk, the weight of the day pressing down. Her hand brushed the scar on her thigh, tracing its faint line. For so long, it had been a symbol of weakness, of silence, of the moment she nearly lost everything. But now, after today, she saw it differently. It wasn't just a scar. It was a lesson, a reminder, a mark that her silence had nearly cost her life and that breaking it had saved others. Michael knocked once before entering, his presence filling the room as always. He set a file on her desk but didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, as if weighing whether to say what was on his mind. Finally, he spoke. "You were more than an officer out there. You were the bridge between soldier and medic. You were both." Sarah swallowed hard, her voice low. "I didn't plan it. I just couldn't let them die." "That's exactly why it matters," he said. "You didn't hesitate, you didn't hide. You stood in both roles because both live in you. That's not weakness, Sarah, that's rare." She turned her face away, the weight of his words heavy. "Do you understand now?" he asked quietly. "Why Ramirez saw something in you, why I did?" Her eyes burned. She nodded once, unable to speak. Michael placed a hand gently on the file. "They're going to want you to expand this program. Wider reach, more soldiers, more lives touched. You ready for that?" Sarah stared at the scar on her leg, her fingers brushing the faded line. Her voice was soft but steady. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I'll be there." Michael gave a faint smile. "That's all anyone ever needs from you." As he left, Sarah sat in silence. The events of the day swirled in her mind, the smoke, the blood, Harris's trembling hands, the weight of scars, both hers and theirs. She realized now that the battlefield wasn't confined to the desert. It lived in every soldier who carried wounds unseen. Her mission wasn't over. It had only changed. And she wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. What remains when the battlefield fades, but the scars remain. Sarah stood at the podium, the lights of the auditorium dimmed, the faces of soldiers and officers stretching into the dark. Her program had grown faster than she imagined. What began as a single classroom now filled halls across bases, training hundreds. Tonight was the first graduation. She looked at them, soldiers she had guided, tested, watched bleed on the training field. Soldiers who now carried knowledge she once had buried inside herself. Her voice was steady, but her heart beat heavy. "You came here to learn about wounds," she began. "How to stop bleeding, how to fight shock, how to keep someone alive when the world is falling apart around you. But the truth is, every one of you walked in with wounds already. some visible, some hidden. This program wasn't just about treating others. It was about learning how to stop hiding your own. The room was silent, the weight of her words pressing like desert heat. She paused, eyes sweeping the audience. I almost died because I stayed silent, because I thought silence meant strength. It doesn't. It means surrender, and surrendering to silence costs more lives than bullets ever will. Her throat tightened, memory flooding, the IED blast, the fever, the infection spreading like fire through her blood. The weight of hiding. The moment Michael had walked into her office and stripped away her walls. She continued, her voice soft but firm. You saved lives already in training, in crisis, in moments you thought you weren't ready for. You did that not because you were perfect, but because you showed up, because you kept moving, because you broke silence before it broke you. The soldiers leaned forward, some nodding, some blinking back emotion. Sarah exhaled, closing the speech with words that had lived inside her since Delta. Remember this, sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Act with courage, act with trust, and act knowing your scars are not weakness, they are proof you fought and you're still here. Applause rose, filling the hall like thunder. Sarah stepped back, her chest aching, her eyes glistening. Later, as the hall emptied, Rodriguez approached with his easy half-smile. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you gave them more than training, you gave them part of yourself." She met his gaze, voice low. "I only gave what they already gave me, trust." He nodded once, saluted, and slipped away. Sarah remained, the room quiet now. She sat on the edge of the stage, exhaustion pressing into her bones. Her scar ached faintly, the way old wounds do when storms shift. She pressed her hand to it, not in shame, but as a reminder. The door creaked open. Michael entered, no uniform tonight, just a simple shirt and that steady presence she had come to know. He walked to the stage, sitting beside her without a word. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the kind of silence that no longer suffocated but healed. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice gentle. "Do you remember what I told you back then? That helping people isn't about keeping score. That sometimes the help we give comes back to us in ways we never expect." She nodded, her throat tight. He smiled faintly. "Turns out I was right. That day with Marcus, I thought I was just patching up a scraped knee, but it led me back to you. And now you've built something that's going to outlast both of us." Her chest ached, her eyes stinging. She whispered, "I still wonder sometimes, if I'd taken that scholarship, if I'd become a doctor." Michael studied her, his voice soft but unwavering. "You already are one, not in title but in spirit. You heal people, their bodies, their trust, their silence. A white coat wouldn't have changed that. It's who you are." Her eyes blurred. She pressed her hand against her mouth, the emotion almost too much. They sat together until the lights dimmed completely, the hall now just shadows and echoes. In the days that followed, Sarah prepared to expand the program across bases. Reports came in of soldiers speaking up sooner, reporting injuries without fear, saving lives by refusing to hide. Her story had become protocol. Her silence, once her greatest flaw, had become her most powerful lesson. One evening, she walked the quiet grounds of the base, the desert wind soft against her face. Stars stretched endless above, the same stars she had once stared at through fever, believing she might never rise again. She thought of Marcus, of her mother, of Dr. Ramirez, of Michael. She thought of her soldiers at Delta, standing at attention as the helicopter carried her away. Her journey had been a circle, from silence to speech, from wounds to wisdom, from soldier to teacher. And she realized now it had never been about the battlefield alone. It had been about carrying scars without letting them define her. She paused, closing her eyes, breathing deep. Her scar pulsed faintly beneath her fingertips, but it no longer felt like a weakness. It felt like a compass. When she opened her eyes, she whispered into the night, words only the stars could hear. "I'm still here." And for the first time, the silence answered not with weight but with peace. because Sarah Martinez had finally learned the truth. Strength wasn't the absence of wounds. It was the courage to live with them and still carry others forward.